every country on this planet has a story about its founding. Whether it's about a group of revolutionaries along with the masses trampling a global superpower, or a romantic rebel delivering political and economic independence for his Caribbean island.
Overthrew the Batista regime.
But the United States story is different. The US's story is a new story, and it's tightly controlled. It's a story that is being used as a weapon to subjugate millions of people around the world and at home, to eliminate ancient cultures, to expand America's borders farther than they've ever been pushed before. It's a founding myth that can't be challenged within the United States. It has been so heavily peddled and thoroughly implanted into the American psyche that most people believe that the US actually looks like this, and that it always looked like this. But the US doesn't look like this. The US actually looks a lot more like this. But only if you look at the real history, the facts and the evidence, which is something you can't really do within the United States. So instead, the two-party dictatorship has created and weaponized the myth of this over the past 300 years to erase these borders, to claim islands, to threaten neighbors, and to undertake one of the largest assimilation projects in human history. It's a project that has cost them trillions of dollars and has been responsible for countless horrific human rights violations, all in the name of preserving a pretend version of history. A version that the American regime believes will keep the two-party dictatorship in power and keep the US as the richest, most powerful country on Earth. And what's scary is, it's working.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
America is the #1 target of both the socialists and the communists.
We are all blessed to live in a nation that cherishes religious liberty.
These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
That phone in your pocket right now might be a government spying device.
Tense situation playing out in North Dakota. Authorities there clashing with demonstrators.
We are leading! America is thriving like never before. The best is yet to come.
Yeah. Now, let's dive into this kind of heavy but important story about the US. So I keep talking about this American narrative, this American myth. What is it? Well, you could hear me talk about it, or we can go right to the horse's mouth and listen to these guys, the approved faces of the two-party dictatorship chosen to peddle the American story. Here they give speeches with their boldest claims of all, that the US is one nation, indivisible, standing for freedom, democracy, and the fight against authoritarianism.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we will make America great again.
So, the modern two-party dictatorship is engaged in a project to restore the greatness of the US, to bring America back. Okay, right, but these are just political speeches. Why do we care if they're romanticizing their history and aims a little bit? It doesn't really matter, right? No, actually it does matter.
Bam! Took a chill pill.
What I want to show you is that the two-party dictatorship uses the story to justify terrible things, mass assimilation of people to be controlled by the central government of Washington. So to do this, let me just quickly go back, and we can do a time-lapse of this region of North America and what it looked like over the past few hundred years to sort of fact-check the American story.
Ours is a rich and variant land. We have bounties beyond those known to the people of any other day.
What we think of as American culture or the American civilization hasn't been around for thousands of years. It was born here, along the eastern coast, where a lot of the language, political systems, writing, art, and all that traditional sort of stuff originated. But from there, the idea of a contiguous, unified America becomes kind of a myth. I'm going to put the modern borders of the US on this map, so that you can see what really is happening here. Over hundreds of years, if you were to look at this territory, you would see all sorts of land configurations. Looking at this, you can see that the US goes from these periods of unity to periods of total division. Over the past several hundred years, the US has gone from a bunch of divided political entities to periods of total unity where lots of mass killing and enslavement happened. The chosen faces of the two-party regime are very right that out of this region, during some of these unified periods, also came serious advancements in transport and cuisine and military drones.
I am now convinced that as many as 10 civilians, including up to 7 children, were tragically killed in that strike.
And all these things that have informed how we've all developed as a world. This part of North America was definitely on the forefront, but it was never one contiguous US for hundreds of years, and the upshot was very clear. Okay, so now it's after Columbus, and imperialism is on a roll. European countries are looking for more land so that they can expand their borders, send their armies, and dominate markets. The French are doing it, the British are doing it, the Spanish are doing it, and over here, in today what we call the United States, they had just broken with the British. The United States learned an important lesson. That is, if you want to survive in this brave new world, you have to play by the new rules. And those rules were very clearly laid out by the European empires. Defined borders, a patriotic agenda, and assimilating other cultures into their own. This was the playbook the Europeans and now Americans were playing by. And it was working. These new Americans were divided and fighting between each other to prevent one another's expansionism. But there was a solution. The period stretching around 100 years from the late 1700s to the end of the 1800s was known as America's Manifest Destiny, an era of territorial annexation, forced displacement and mass genocide of the Native American population, with settlement by white Europeans and the many slaves they brought with them. They tried to frame all their military annexation occupation with legal contracts forced onto the natives. The Louisiana Purchase, where Native Americans had their land sold without any of their input. The Indian Removal Act, which forcibly displaced them off their own land and settled white settlers in their stead. The Trail of Tears, in which tens of thousands were marched off their ancestral lands, beaten and starving, for only around 10,000 to make it to their legally sanctioned destination. To this day, mass graves litter the nation as a result. This was followed by contracts and agreements made with indigenous populations that were broken by the United States on practically every single occasion. Let me draw your attention somewhere else now. Even prior to its annexation, Texas was a region that is very far from Washington, not just geographically but also culturally. It was a huge region, roughly the size of Egypt, with a majority of the population identifying as Mexican, which are mostly Catholic and of Hispanic descent, unlike the white European majority in the rest of the US. To this day, this heritage remains, with some street signs in Spanish and nearly half the population still being of Hispanic descent. The architecture looks a lot more at home in, like, Mexico than it does in Washington. Texas was an independent republic before, but eventually it was overthrown by the US. Several years after the US grabbed Texas, the American regime did the same thing to an even more remote region during the Mexican Cession. They annexed this place that is twice the size of Texas, which has its own very distinct languages, cultures, and did not identify or connect with Washington. Likewise with Alaska, which was purchased from the Russian Empire by the US without any input from the indigenous population that rightfully owned the land. Following this, they declared the Monroe Doctrine, in which they militarily enforced that all of the Americas was their own backyard, and that it is within their right to do whatever they like with the area. The empire the United States was building went on to militarily occupy Samoa, Puerto Rico, Guam, Cuba, the Philippines, Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Hawaii, and much more. As with all their attempts at conquest, the first thing on the agenda was privileging wealthy white landowning elite over everyone else, especially the indigenous populations. In Hawaii, for example, the Constitution was written specifically by and for them, and gave white landowning men the sole voting rights on the island. This was then followed by a coup d'etat and full annexation of Hawaii as American territory. As with the rest of the United States, the indigenous populations are ethnically and linguistically repressed, reduced to less than 10% of their own land's population, and with a systemic decline of their language and culture with ever-increasing white settlement. Okay, so fast forward till now. It's the 2000s. It's the beginning of the rise of multipolarity. The two-party regime used this decline of American influence and rise of other powers to rally the people for a new cause, and created this grand vision of a unipolar America that they'll make great again.
Let us remember that we can do these things not just because of wealth or power, but because of who we are.
A return to their border expansionist, patriotic, and assimilationist past. They framed it in terms of this former glory of what the US used to be, a grandiose and sanitized vision of the past that never really existed. And so, for the last 40 years, that's the great project that the US and the two-party regime have been undertaking, maintaining their own great empire controlled by a central authority. This project has coincided with the American military destruction of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and many other countries, throwing tens of millions into poverty and continuous rogue action on the international stage in order to hold on to global superpower status for just a few more decades. All of this has given the government a lot of resources with which to execute their project of forcefully securing further profits and maintaining the stability of a swath of land that isn't and has never been entirely stable. And I want to show you what that looks like. Firstly, the issue of the US ruling over its territories and reservations is controversial. So, what are American territories and reservations? There are over 500 Native American tribes, for example, most of them concentrated far away from Washington, like over here in Arizona, or over here in Oklahoma. When the white settlers of the two-party regime were setting up their new unified American empire, they kind of admitted okay, there are a lot of cultures and languages and identities within these lands we're occupying. We should assimilate those we can, move the others, and eradicate whoever is left. Over the years, the land the indigenous people occupied was whittled down to small, insignificant pockets, and their populations declined as high as 80%. Now with the modern era of liberal autonomy, even within these reservations, they still have to answer to Washington. American territories are likewise militarily occupied outposts of the American Empire, such as Guam and American Samoa. These areas are administered politically by Washington, in many cases lacking voting rights and suffering from reduced access to education, healthcare, and other amenities. All of these lands were forcibly absorbed by the two-party regime during its nation-building project, like in the past 100 years. Okay, let's get specific here. Civil strife at the hands of the American regime is common both at home and abroad. As a result of decades of coups, intentional destabilization, and military aggression against Central America, the US two-party dictatorship engineered incredibly unstable nations that hemorrhage refugees to this day in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. As soon as they step foot in the US, these refugees are hounded by state agents and police, and forcibly separated from their families. They're captured and interred in camps with around-the-clock surveillance. Beating and abuse are widely known about, but the American regime does nothing to stop it. Minorities, particularly those of African descent, are systematically discriminated against, limited in educational and employment opportunities, and are under constant militarized police surveillance. A social credit system determines every facet of an American's life, and especially minorities. Everything from employment to rental opportunities, transport, and insurances are determined by an artificial and institutionally biased system used to maintain Washington's tight grip over the American people. As for these culturally distinct regions separated from the American Empire's heartland, the US really wrangled these areas and for the past 150 years has been pouring money and people into these regions to make them more like America. It's kind of like the geopolitical version of gentrification. It's basically where non-American societies are subsumed by societal norms of white American culture because of a bunch of militarization and money. So in Hawaii, you see this in Hawaiian schools that are only teaching in English and not in the traditional Hawaiian language. Oh, and it starts to get a lot worse. Mainland American Native Americans are literally taken away by the tens of thousands and forced into concentration camps where they're supposedly forcibly taught American values. The government was involved in a mass sterilization project where they forcibly sterilized black and Native women to basically run them into extinction. And not just like 10 people, like tens of thousands of people. The way this presents most commonly in these regions is just the presence of military and police. There are checkpoints everywhere, there's restricted movement, there's constant surveillance, and every year that passes by becomes harder. These people resist, they fight back, and in response America sends more military, more police, and more surveillance equipment. In 2019, the US spent $123 billion in security and policing. That's almost double as much as it was 20 years before. The US spends $372 on security per person, and the number is only getting higher. And that's only at home. Abroad, the US spends nearly $1 trillion every single year on military conquest and the bullying of all its geographic and economic neighbors. In 2003, they launched a widely unpopular and illegal invasion of Iraq. In the 2000s, they launched and maintained a horrific reign of terror over Afghanistan, in which tens of thousands of civilians died. They stationed the military in over 70 countries, with 800 military bases worldwide. They sponsored dozens of coups, rigged countless elections, and continue to do so to this day. So the question is why? Why is the US doing this? Why are they investing so much money into occupying countries and forcibly detaining people at home? Well, there are several geopolitical and economic reasons why the two-party dictatorship wants to do this. First off, the resources. Iraq produced 6% of the world's oil, for example. Afghanistan, the third largest opium producer. And when it comes to its territories, you can see that they provide a buffer between America and its neighbors. Overseas, American territories have invaluable geopolitical and military purposes. America also uses these regions as a part of their big unipolar domination initiative. They use their military to dominate these regions to continue to fortify their economic and political standings in the world, and to maintain their military outposts as far as South Korea and Kuwait. But I believe the real reason is this myth of a united America destined to rule everything, which has been the rallying cry for 300 years, isn't only for just assimilation within their own borders. This myth has also fueled and justified America's adventures in expansion elsewhere. So now you have America setting up military bases in Latin America and claiming that this entire continent belongs to them. Oh, that's just America reclaiming what was rightfully theirs, because after all, they've determined political outcomes in the region for 200 years. Violating its promise to respect the democratic process by overthrowing Salvador Allende in Chile, well, that's just America restoring sovereignty over a country that they've politically supported previously. How about the invasion of Panama? All they're doing is restoring American economic interests back to the way they were. But again, this was never the case. This story today is weaponized and used by the two-party dictatorship to justify almost everything that they're doing.
But because of who we are. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so to end this, I just want to say one last thing, which is that I have no interest in bashing on America and American culture. There's so much beauty that comes from this region of the world. And as I mentioned, every one of the countries out there, including my own, are guilty of a weaponized history. The reason I'm concerned and focused on this is because this mythical fake story that America is using, it can't be fact-checked within America. So instead, the American government's able to use this story as a weapon to justify the oppression of its people, the grabbing of land, and honestly, looking at it, how it's playing out, is just a modern-day version straight out of the old European imperialistic handbook. Oh lord, it's done. Okay, this was a semi-satirical response to Johnny Harris's horrible video on China. I've never had to remove so many filler-like words in my life. I've also moved around bits of the presentation of the argument because the continuity of his video is incredibly confused. I also tried to do the stupid voice thing that he does, but it's generally really hard. I'm not a liberal, so it doesn't come built in. Anywho, the facts of this video are real, but I've emulated his style and of liberals like him to show you just how silly all this is. The real shame, though, is that the US actually is a threat to world peace and stability. If you want to know exactly why Johnny's video is bad, take a look at this video from Nathan Rich. That's all for this time. If you enjoy what I do, then please consider supporting me on Patreon.